79 years ago, my fathers brought forth through a bloody battle for their freedom the hope and idea that all men could now be created equal. It was embodied in the acts of bravery that the men of this country inspired through them, through their actions and fighting, and after 400 years that they could finally be free. But the notion set in place by my fathers would perceive them heavy, knowing that freedom truly would be an uphill battle for their children. Fast forward 158 years, the year is 2023, and their children are still fighting what is defined as freedom. It is more important than ever now to allow an equitable playing field for their children and their children's children. I hope today to change your perspective on reparation, convince you to do your due diligence, and create legislation and policy that's equitable and sending resources to our Black communities. As a Black person in this country, I understand firsthand the hardships of generational inequitable gaps. The barriers that my mother faced and her parents faced and their parents have significantly impacted my life over the long run, over a white family who may be in the same circumstances. Today, I will define how white families are just wealthier than Black families, shifting the socioeconomic status over Blacks below whites, and how housing inequities have led a century of wealth gaps in our country, and why the case for reparations should be a resourced policy choice. Now, the leading cause of inequitable gaps between whites and Blacks is that white families are just wealthier than Black families. Now, white households are worth 20 times more than that of Black households, and the increasing gap allows whites to have more monies than Blacks. About 15% of whites face little to no negative wealth impacts, while almost a third of Blacks face little to almost all negative impact. Right now, today, this statistic still reigns true, and not because of a new policy in place. These are only possible because, number one, white families are more likely to receive an inheritance from their ancestors than Black families. And if a Black family did receive an inheritance, it's significantly less than that of a white family. And number two, tax laws and policies are shifted to further this racial wealth gap. Wealth taxes today are significantly lower than taxes collected on work income. If more white people received inheritance and more Black people worked to make their wealth, this disproportionately affected Black people. While issues like the wealth gap have ridden Black families for centuries, slavery tactics are still alive and have crept into our systems to restrict Blacks from accessing everyday needs like food, clothing, and shelter. Housing inequalities have been used to keep Black people in poverty and below the wealth gap of whites for years. This is done by using redlining and discriminatory practices. Banks and housing market lenders deny loans to customers based on neighborhoods deemed financially at risk, and practices such as urban renewals and laws with housing discriminations. Now, white families can be guaranteed financial support to buy homes, through mortgage, through loans, and other means. And this is the largest point of building wealth for any family. While a white family may only need a down payment for a home, Black families are tasked with higher down payments, insurance fees, and many more hoops before even being considered for loans from banks. Now, after the Federal Housing Administration was created by Congress in 1934, interest rates and down payments actually decreased, but not for Black people who lived in neighborhoods marked through redlining efforts. The FHA marked these neighborhoods based on their perceived credibility, and anything given a not so good grade did not qualify for these incentives. Also, many lenders even appraise the property and attempt to sell it to black people at higher rates than they would to whites. This practice was commonly known as blockbusting. Now, whether through wealth gaps in America caused by generational wealth disparities or housing inequalities, whether there is a need for reparation is out of the question. Many may argue that reparations are too expensive or that anyone would be able to determine who would get them. Reparations are not new or uncommon in the United States. In fact, the United States paid reparations to 17 Native American tribes as recently as 2016. It has also happened in other places across the world. The German government, for example, paid north of $86 billion in restoration to Holocaust victims, their heirs, and their families. The best practices for solving this issue is to make crucial investments in resources for black and low income communities affected by practices such as redlining, wealth inequalities, and generational racial discrimination. The case for reparation is needed to progress black Americans forward in society. Without it, it will only allow whites to continue to grow their wealth gaps and leave blacks in poverty and without the resources that they need to thrive. The case for reparations can simply be justified by the growing wealth gap between white families and black families, and housing inequalities in this country. Though it may not take many years to solve this issue, it will be rewarding and justified in all the 79 years of freedom my father so desperately fought for. Our future can only rest in the hands of policy choices that are not discriminatory, and reparations are long overdue to our black communities. Thank you.